This is Georgia. Not that Georgia, but that Georgia. One that's right next to Russia. Not a good place to be, just as Ukraine. Citizens here have been protesting for 310 days straight now. Technically, they are protesting about a single law. A new law that a pro-Russian party is trying to pass. But in reality, these protests are really about Vladimir Putin trying to annex Georgia politically. You see, for years, Georgia was Europe's most promising candidate for the EU. But over the last couple of years, the government in power is actively dragging the country towards Kremlin. That's why protests now are growing larger and larger. Just last night, tens of thousands of people took to the street, waving Ukrainian, Georgian, and American flags. I know some people are gonna be pissed about this, but all over the world, American flag means freedom. And that's why protesters here are waving it. But yesterday, the confrontation turned violent. You see, after 300 plus days of peacefully protesting, yesterday, a few protesters tried storming the presidential palace. But according to the former president of Georgia and kind of a leader of these protesters, she's saying this was a false flag operation set up by the government in power, so they have an excuse to use violence against peaceful protesters. Clearly, a lot is happening in the country, and it seems things may escalate in the coming days. So let's back up and figure out how we got here. Much like Ukraine, Russia and Georgia have a long history, but I'll keep it brief. After the Russian Revolution in 1917, Georgia managed to regain its independence, but this freedom was short-lived. In 1921, just 4 years later, despite Russia having unconditionally recognized Georgia's statehood, the Soviet army invaded the country and occupied the capital of Tbilisi. This was the beginning of 70 years of Soviet occupation, with Georgia being fully assimilated into the USSR. But Georgia finally restored its independence after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Even after this, Russia was not willing to let Georgians live in peace. Throughout the 90s, Russia supported separatist movements in the region Abkhazia and South Ossetia, often even stationing Russian troops as peacekeepers in the area. This continued for a while until 2008, when a major conflict broke out. This was Putin's first invasion. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Georgia to protect the ethnic Russian-speaking population. Well, where have I heard that before? Or I guess after. This was Putin after the invasion.
Is Crimea, Sevastopol a goal for Russia?
You said the next goal. We didn't have any goal here either. So I think talking about some kind of next target is inappropriate.
So you rule it out?
If you allow me to answer, you will be satisfied. Crimea is not a disputed territory. There was no ethnic conflict there, unlike the conflict between South Ossetia and Georgia. And Russia has long recognized the borders of modern-day Ukraine. On the whole, we have completed our talks on borders. The issue of demarcation still stands, but this is just a technicality. I think questions about such goals for Russia have provocative undertones. Any similar goals for Russia, I think, gives provocative meaning.
I'm guessing that reporter was right when he said next target was Ukraine. But anyways, let's get back to the story at hand. You see, even after taking over 2 territories of Georgia, Putin was not satisfied. That's why Russian oligarchs continued to fund pro-Russian parties in Georgian politics. The goal was to slowly take over the country politically instead of militarily. This is where this guy comes in. This guy is a billionaire, and he made his money in Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed. You see, in Russia, there's one rule. Your money is Putin's money, and Putin's money is Putin's money. That means if this guy wanted to keep his money, he had to follow Kremlin's orders. That's why in 2012, he founded the Georgian Dream Party in Georgia. And voila, the same year, party wins an election and comes into power. Yet another example of money does buy elections. Now, of course, it wasn't just about the money. There was also the Russian propaganda machine that helped the party on social media, and the Georgian Orthodox Church That's basically Russia's extended mafia arm that provided tacit backing to this party. Now, after winning in 2012, the same party has been in power for roughly 13 years now and going. On top of this, the party also did what every politician in any country loves to do. They lied to the Georgian people to get in power, but once in power, they just went back on their promises. You see, even in 2012, 80% of Georgians supported joining the EU. So party said they were pro-EU. They would do it if they're elected. But recently, their actions are not really lining up with that promise. Now, just to be fair to Putin's oligarchy party, the government did achieve several milestones that moved the country closer to Europe and farther from Kremlin's orbit. But all that changed in 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine. You see, after that invasion, the Georgian Dream Party tried passing a law that was not very pro-EU to say the least. It was straight out of Putin's playbook. In fact, Putin had used the same law roughly 11 years ago to stamp out all opposition in Russia. Here's more details on it.
In Georgia, it's been dubbed the Foreign Agent Law, or the Russian law by critics. And it's so politically heated that politicians have been fighting and throwing things in parliament. Under the bill, any NGO or independent media receiving more than 20% of its funding from abroad would have to register as organizations, quote, bearing the interests of a foreign power. In other words, foreign agents. They would also be monitored by Georgia's Justice Ministry and could be forced to share sensitive information or face hefty fines. Critics, including Georgia's president, say the bill copies a 2012 Russian law.
Is a duplicate of what President Putin has been doing in Russia over the past years in order to suppress the civil society, the non-governmental organizations.
Georgia's prime minister has accused NGOs of attempting to stage two revolutions in the country. His ruling Georgian Dream Party argues the bill will boost transparency of foreign funding and denies that Russia is behind the legislation. But opposition parties and protesters don't buy it.
The Russification of Georgia is ongoing. They are trying to establish Russian dictatorship in Georgia. Unfortunately, Georgian lawmakers partake in this process, pursuing Russian policies in the country for years now.
You see, the law's language is designed to stigmatize any opposition group as serving foreign interests. The penalty for failure to register can be steep, ranging from criminal fines of $3,600 to a maximum 5-year prison sentence. Even minor violations like not filing financial reports can trigger fines or 6 months jail time. This is not about transparency as the government claims. NGOs were already required to disclose their funding to the government officials. The true purpose of this bill is to give the Justice Ministry the power to request personal information about individuals who work for these organizations. This includes details like persons' political views, ethnicity, religious belief, and even sex life. This level of surveillance and political intimidation is what happens when government copies Putin's homework. You see, the reason this bill is called the Russian law is because, as you just heard me call it before, Putin used this same strategy to kill all opposition in Russia. Almost a decade ago, faced with mass protest after the 2011 Duma elections, the Kremlin began systematically designing laws intended to intimidate and stamp out a civil society opposition. You guys want to take one guess who was behind this law? It was Russia's infamous Prime Minister, Vladimir Putin. Putin's foreign agent law allowed the state to brand any critical organization as foreign threat. It was such a crazy law that in 2022, the European Courts of Human Rights ruled that this violated the rights of Russian civil society. But it was a too little, too late kind of thing because the ruling came roughly 11 years after the law was enacted. Now, the Georgian Dream Party is trying to do the same thing in Georgia. They previously tried to pass the law in 2023, but withdrew it after mass protest. But as soon as Georgia received its EU candidate status back in 2023, the party reintroduced the bill almost unchanged, seemingly confident that Brussels would be too distracted to withdraw their status. This all brings us to 2024. There was an important parliamentary election held on October 26th. At this election, the Georgian Dream Party suspiciously won a small majority. This is what I mean by suspicious. Random guys all over the country were just stuffing multiple votes into ballot boxes, and no one actually stopped them. Now, after these videos became public, the president actually announced that he will not be recognizing the result of the election. Then guess what? The Georgian Dream Party just kicked out the president because in Georgia, the president is actually elected by the parliament, not by the people. So they just convened a new parliament where the party had the majority and they appointed a new president. As if this wasn't all bad enough, just a month after this, on November 28, 2024, the government announced that they would suspend all talks about joining the European Union until 2028. This decision led to massive public protest because, as I told you guys earlier, 80% of the Georgians want the country to become an EU member. The move directly contradicted with what people wanted and what the Constitution of Georgia says. They have a law enshrined in the constitution that says the country needs to move towards EU membership. These protests are still going on almost a year later, and just recently they've been picking up steam again. But the GD party has been working closely with Kremlin to basically kill the will of people to continue protesting. This is something I talked to Professor Michael Clark with, who actually visited Georgia earlier this year. Let's listen to that clip.
So that this movement is actually very vigorous, but the Georgian government knows how to close down these movements. I mean, there's a new technique of repression, which is just making it very difficult and expensive for people to protest. They lose their jobs, they lose access to social services, their children suffer, their families suffer. You don't have to arrest people and torture them the way Assad did in Syria. I mean, he did that for years. I mean, absolutely brutal crackdown. There are different ways of doing it now. By using social media, you actually make it difficult for people to protest, and you just play it long. And that's what's been happening in Georgia. They close it down by more law. I mean, the Russians have been doing it now for 20 odd years. More law, and you just keep applying the law quite reasonably. You actually do apply the law. You don't brutalize people. You just keep applying the law. So 3 months in prison, 2 weeks in prison. You don't have to beat them up or anything like that. Just 2 weeks in prison, and in another month you get another 2 weeks in prison, and then you've lost your job. And then what are you going to do? And then your children suffer, and so on. That's what they do. They close down the opposition. So the groups that come out in places like Georgia, my heart goes out to them, tend to be younger people who are unmarried. They don't have families to worry about. They don't have big careers to worry about. They're there because, in a way, they can tolerate the sort of the pressure that people are put under. Yeah.
So you don't expect anything like Nepal happening in Georgia?
I wish it would, but I don't want the protesters in Georgia to bring violence down on themselves. They're very brave as it is, and the issue, with Nepal, and we see it elsewhere as well. I mean, you see it in a lot of societies around the world. You're seeing it in Argentina that a lot of Gen Z people come out because they're so angry with the governments, and they're angry for different reasons, but they're angry because the governments are so useless. In the case of Georgia, they're angry because the government is repressive and is leaning towards Russia, which is where the majority of the population really don't want to go. And in Georgia, they do have a figurehead. I mean, Salome Zurabashvili, who is the ex-president. She's a very brave lady. And Salome Zurabashvili still stands as a symbol of the resistance, as it were, to this dreadful government that they've got, run by rich oligarchs on behalf of Moscow. And so she is a symbol, and that gives a certain order and a certain sort of constitutional framework to the protests. And I hope they can do it well. If it becomes chaotic and violent, then the chances are they won't win, because the government have got so much repressive machinery at their disposal.
YouTube just dropped a mind-boggling announcement. It is paying creators $64 million per day. Why? Well, because YouTube doesn't have enough creators. That is why you see videos on your homepage that have less than 1,000 views, like this one right here. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that everyone should start a channel. But if you have ever wondered about starting a YouTube channel or a faceless channel, now is a perfect time. YouTube is paying creators millions of dollars every single day, and it's pushing newer and smaller channels now more than ever. But I'm sure you have many questions on how to start and grow a channel. We get questions in our email all the time from some of you guys. That's why we decided to put all our YouTube advice into one YouTube video for completely free. So if you're someone interested in starting your own channel, you can watch that video here on YouTube by clicking the link in the description or card on your screen.